Hey everybody, my name is Brendan Noble and I'm a young adult author. Welcome back to my Slavic Saturday series where we talk about Slavic history, mythology, and folklore. And we're finally back to actually being on Saturday after being on Sunday last week. So I'm glad to be back, and today we're talking again about a Slavic god. We've been talking about some demons lately, so let's get back into talking about some deities. And the first up of this one this week will be Mokosh, who is the Slavic Great Mother, but also the goddess of women and the protector of women. Now, Mokosh is one of the most well-known women or goddesses in Slavic mythology, and that's probably because we know the most historical about her, especially because she's married to Perun, who is the god of thunder and largely the chief god in Slavic myth. And so she's also the mother of some of the key players that show up in a lot of Slavic mythological stories, namely Yarilo, who's one of the spring gods, and the god of war. Also Marzana, who's the goddess of death, and the two of those ones play a major role. She's also sometimes considered the mother of Dijivana, who's the goddess of the wilds and hunt, and also Ziva or Vesna, who's another spring goddess, depending on which region you look at. So because she's both the mother of a lot of these people and married to Perun, she's incredibly at the core of a lot of the stories, sometimes at the edge, but she's mentioned in a lot of things, so we do know more about her. She's also the only goddess who had an idol at among the six that Vladimir the Great built in Kiev, which is one of the things that allows us to know what were some of the most major gods and goddesses at the time. So it shows she is the most significant goddess. And she has multiple roles that sometimes change depending on what region or story we're looking at, but some consistent things are the fact she is a spinner or weaver, kind of representing some of the traditional roles and tasks that women would do in Slavic ancient society. And she is also considered both a fertility goddess for men and women, so she was prayed to for everyone and when they were hopes of having a child, but also when they were having a child. Another perhaps slightly odd role that Mokosh has is divination, and this falls under her a little oddly. Divination is projecting the future, often through witchcraft, and while Veles and a few other gods have a role to play in this, she has the connection a lot to women, and women were often the ones doing the divination rituals. So this was thought often to fall under her context. And this becomes a very important thing because divination was an important part of a lot of the ancient Slavic folklore, because they would use divination both in determining when to go to war with horse rituals, but also with individual people coming to diviners to look at individual things for the future. It was a pretty common thing, and so it also was a major role Mokosh played, also somewhat passively like some of her other roles. So unlike some of the ones like Marzana that we have a very consistent look for her, it can be a little bit more difficult for Mokosh, which is interesting because of how major of a goddess she is. But all we know is that she really had long flowing blonde hair and would typically wear flowery things associated with her role as the Great Mother of nature. But beyond that, her hair was sometimes pictured as covered, which was more traditional for a wife, but she would also sometimes have it uncovered or braided, which is a large variety because these are different phases in a Slavic woman's life back then. So sometimes maybe that was just artistic, creative thought, but who knows what the actual picture originally would have been. One of the most famous stories that Mokosh can be a part of is the battle between Perun, her husband, and Veles, who is her husband's rival and also the god of the underworld, the lowlands, and cattle. Now, Perun and Veles are often considered rivals for various reasons. One of those reasons is often considered that Veles kidnapped Mokosh from Perun. It also is sometimes considered that he kidnapped Yarilo, their son, from Perun, and sometimes it was just he stole cattle from Perun. So it's sometimes hard to know exactly why this story occurred and this rivalry occurred, but often it was considered because he took Mokosh from Perun. And this meant that they started a battle because the dude abducted his wife. But Mokosz was often considered sometimes to go willingly, and they had sometimes had kids with, she sometimes had kids with Veles because of that. Sometimes she was considered she was abducted and went unwillingly, and in other stories she didn't get abducted at all. And it's hard to know again what the original idea was, because there is so few primary sources in Slavic myth, even about someone as well known as Mokosz, because a lot of things were burned, drowned, and a lot of things weren't written down because the Slavs didn't have a written language until the Christian missionaries showed up. So in my books, that I announced the first name of the book to my newsletter. I'll be announcing that publicly as well for my Slavic fantasy series. But in the books, Mokosz is going to have kind of a similar passive role to the part she plays in most myth. With the fact she is a divination goddess, Otilia, who's one of the protagonists, is a sorceress, but also does divination rituals, and she consults with Mokosz for advice through these rituals. So Mokosz's advice, though, is often very indirect and a lot more nudging in the right direction. That can be frustrating to Otilia, but it also can represent Mokosz's hands-offness, but her still having to a role to play in nudging things in the right direction in certain stories. So that's all I have for you today on the Slavic Saturday series. If you're interested in these things in my book series, please like and subscribe down below. I'll be talking about them a lot. There's also a newsletter you can subscribe to down below. Only gets sent out once a month, so you don't get spammed, but you will be receiving free copies of the first book in my other dystopian series I've been writing, but also free copies of side novellas that are going to be related to the Slavic fantasy series, so why not subscribe? Hope to see you guys all next week, where we'll be talking about more demons, myths, Slavs, and a lot of fun stuff. I haven't decided what I'm doing yet, so see you guys.